So, I can't help but notice that the Inquisitor is also using one of the new Thai melteds. It's Thai M? I don't know. And they actually have a full complement of 9 fighters. Almost one whole squadron against these guys. Oh, and 2 Imperial Star Destroyers, because those are just handed out like candy nowadays. You know what's funny? I wouldn't be surprised if there are literally only 2 ISDs in the entire sector. In the old EU, there were actually quite a few areas that had 1 ISD, or no ISDs assigned to them. They had only VSDs or Dreads or whatever. Just food for thought. Anywho, so Ezra feels his first few flickers of the dark side and the way that works in this episode. And I kind of like it because, again, he almost comes at it from an outsider's perspective, which actually works really well, I think. Really, Luke wasn't really... He didn't really get to interact with the dark side. Really. Really. I'm sorry, I'm never using the word. He didn't actually interact with the dark side properly until Empire Strikes Back. And then he had several interactions with it, which kind of helped change and shape the mythos going forward. Here, Ezra has never even really heard of this thing. One of my favorite bits in this episode is, first of all, he uses the dark side to call the the Frynok creature and send it at him. And then he passes out, and when he gets up, the first thing he says is, I feel cold. I like that. It's a nice little touch. By the way, I've been kind of holding back my comments on this, but why does the Inquisitor look like that? Like, was he human? He's got sharp teeth, he's got pointed teeth, and weirdo eyes, and like someone's kind of drilled into his skull, and he was he just really getting into the look? I don't know. You know how these Sith are. They just... So... I could really dig into this episode in a nitpicky, geeky kind of a way. I've decided not to. But one thing I do want to... I have to comment on this, is they eject the Phantom from the Ghost, and the Phantom exits hyperspace on its own without any kind of equipment. It just basically is no longer being propelled through hyperspace, so it naturally leaves hyperspace. Now that's relevant because that's not how it used to work. Back in the EU, you needed something to enter and you needed something to exit. That was one of the dangers of hyperspace, and in fact it was mentioned several times that hyperspace travel is pretty damn dangerous. Now there are things that could force you back to real space, and there were certain things that could force your equipment to force an emergency shunt back to real space. But for the most part, that was it. I just thought that was interesting they decided to go in the direction with it. And then again, Clone Wars decided to just kind of do all sorts of things all over the place with continuity, so whatever at this point, right? I wanted to mention that, though, because in addition to that being kind of weird and nitpicky, there's a throwaway scene where Kanan goes back and pulls the tracker off of the Phantom by hand. I know, he's a Jedi, but come on! You could have just been like, in order to do that. Instead, he just pulls this thing, which is supposed to adhere to a ship that goes through space and accelerates and decelerates at massive rates, and he just pulls it off by hand. Anyways, whatever, moving on. So there's this really good bit where Kanan basically decides this is what's best for Ezra. This is what needs to happen. You learn best by surviving. So I'm going to throw you to the wolves, so to speak. And he's right. And I like that. And you know why I like that? Because it's showing an understanding of a basic principle that an astonishingly large number of people never understand. That not everyone learns in the same ways. This was one of the greatest failings of the old Jedi, in my opinion. Of the old Jedi Order, I should be more clear. That they insisted on the exact same policy for every single Jedi, and, well, that's how they failed Anakin, isn't it? So I like that he is adapting to this. It's funny, because I mentioned a few episodes ago that Kanan's kind of a newbie himself. He's not exactly a Jedi Master, but worse than that, Kanan was trained under the Old Order. So he also kind of has some of those hang-ups going for him, right? Anyways. I do like his quote there, and I wrote it down here. I got news for you, kid. Everyone's afraid. That's nice. I like that. I like that approach to it. And I do like how this episode directly approaches continuity. Again, fingers crossed that this is going to be his trend going forward. Also, notice the reintroduction of Fulcrum once more. At this point, I'm pretty sure I know who Fulcrum is, but in my readings of this show, the name Fulcrum never came up. So I have a few guesses at this point. Don't tell me. Obviously, I don't want to know right now, but I have a few guesses as to who it could be. We'll see. We'll see when we get there, because I'm sure they're going to showcase whoever he is. They've only shown 2 lightsaber fights in the last 8 episodes. I'm actually kind of glad for that. I know that sounds like a strange statement. I like a good lightsaber fight as much as anyone else, especially a really well choreographed one. As I've said many times, one of my favorite lightsaber fights of all time is Palpatine versus Savage and Maul over in Clone Wars. But I prefer it if lightsaber fights are more the occasional treat rather than the main course, if that makes any sense. I like how they'll just show up. I like it better when they show up every now and again and are more exceptional. And I don't know if this is spread out enough, but I do like the fact that they're not leaning on them every episode, like some other works I could mention. I also like how Ezra forgiving Sibo and letting go of that is what enabled him to get in touch with the Phrynox, or however you pronounce that, and be able to connect with them. It's kind of a silly, sort of fairy tale kind of a thing, but at the same time, that is very Star Wars. So, there's actually a really good scene. I've praised the directing of this show several times, and I'm going to praise it again. It's typical, but the scene where the Inquisitor is advancing on Ezra, and he happens to have both lightsabers, so his face is literally highlighted by the white blue and the dark red, the things that are usually shown to personify the light side and the dark side. It's a nice little touch as he's discussing things. It's also nice to see that the Inquisitor, who is obviously more than a match for Kanan and Ezra, at least at their current state, nevertheless has to hold back at the face of the mother Phrynox, or whatever she is. Now, that being said, I praise the directing one more time. I love how the fight between the Inquisitor and the mother is in the background. It's not really the focus, because the focus is on Ezra. It's more character-centric. I mean, the flashy thing is there, and you can see it going on. And, what do you know? I was right. The spinny blade turned out to be a really good intimidation tactic. He literally scared the mother into stopping attacking him, rather than actually defeating it. Nice touch. So, oh God, we need to go, and we now know about his... I'm guessing that's going to become more serialized going forward, with the whole, I now know what happened to my parents, and he's become aware of the dark side, and he's barely dealing with it, and characters developing forward, and I would not be happy with this. Here's hoping it will continue to develop in the future.